You're listening to Episodes, a podcast from the Cyclic Vomiting Syndrome Association.
Please be aware that the content of this podcast is created for general, informational, and educational purposes only. It is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition.
Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast.
The opinions, perspectives, and experiences shared by our guests, including medical professionals and scientific researchers, are solely their own and do not necessarily represent the views or official policies of their respective institutions, employers, professional organizations, or any other entities they may be associated with.
Their appearance on this podcast does not constitute an endorsement by the Cyclic Vomiting Syndrome Association.
Furthermore, neither the Cyclic Vomiting Syndrome Association, its board of directors, employees, volunteers, hosts, or anyone associated with this podcast takes responsibilities for any actions or inactions on your part based on the information provided.
We do not endorse or recommend any specific tests, physicians, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned.
Thanks for joining us today on Episodes of Podcast by the Cyclic Vomiting Syndrome Association. Each episode, we try to bring a different CVS perspective or information about CVS that will increase awareness, spark conversations around CVS, and ultimately change the way that cyclic vomiting syndrome is seen and understood. I am your host and president of the Cyclic Vomiting Syndrome Association, Belinda Killian. I'm also a parent and caregiver to a person impacted by CVS. Joining us today is Dr. Bruno Chumpitazi. Dr. Chumpitazi is a pediatric gastroenterologist and current division chief of pediatric gastroenterology, hepatology, nutrition at Duke University School of Medicine. During his training, he was struck by how common disorders of the gut-brain interaction were and has dedicated his clinical and research career toward providing better care of children with these disorders, such as cyclic vomiting syndrome. His NIH-funded research has focused on both gastroparesis and dietary intervention in irritable bowel syndrome. Thank you for joining us today, Bruno.
Thank you for having me, Belinda. It's a real pleasure to be here with you all, and I will certainly do the best I can with your questions. I think one thing that you didn't mention there, which in that very kind introduction, was that I'm a super expert in cyclic vomiting syndrome, but I do take care of patients with cyclic vomiting syndrome and then have a strong clinical interest in this area.
Awesome. And sometimes that's really all it takes, is having somebody who is interested and empathetic in trying to treat conditions like this. So
Fantastic.
Today, it sounds like we're going to be exploring the whys and hows of cyclic vomiting syndrome, or CVS. Dr. Chumpitazi, CVS is placed under a larger classification of disorders of the gut-brain interaction, or DGBI. Let's talk about DGBI, or for those who are not familiar with the acronym, like I already said, disorders of the gut-brain interaction. I feel like that. Go ahead.
Yeah, go
Sorry.
ahead. No, go ahead. Please go ahead.
I was going to say, I feel like the term DGBI encompasses so much about CVS, but I've heard that there's a lot of controversy over the term. Are you kind of hearing that?
I am hearing that, and feel free to call me Bruno the whole time, please.
Okay.
Yes, it is controversial in the sense that some folks don't agree with it, and you've defined it really well. I like the idea behind it in the sense that what it's bringing to the forefront is that ultimately there are gut factors that are involved in some of these disorders. So whether it be how things are moving through the GI tract, or what the GI tract is sending to the brain for signals in terms of sensation, or the microbiome or diet, and all that's interacting with your brain or your central nervous system factors, such as stress-related factors or anxiety, depression, or just the connectivity. And we're going to be talking about that today. All the connections within your brain lead to these different disorders, and folks are finding out more and more. So, for example, we're seeing this paradigm play a role in irritable bowel syndrome. We're seeing it play a role in functional dyspepsia, where it hurts right after you eat something. We're seeing it play a role, we believe, in cyclic vomiting syndrome. And there are so many different DGBI. So it's more of like an overarching, kind of definition. The previous one, as you know, was functional GI disorders. And some folks didn't like that one. And ultimately, some folks say, hey, rather than having this overarching definition, can't we just go right to the disorder itself? So can't we just say CVS or just say IBS or say, something else? And everyone has a different take on that. One of the aspects of this is, I think it's real, unfortunately, and you were teaching me about this when we were chatting, is there's a stigma behind this, some of these disorders, and there shouldn't be. And that's why I love this podcast and I love CVSA and I love, trying to get the word out on this. But because of that and some of the treatments involved with this that are focused on the brain side, this disorders of gut-brain interaction,
Mhm.
some folks are concerned that, folks are trying to put this all into a box of it's all in your head. And that is not the message that we're trying to get out at all. And there was an attempt with that with the DGBI name, right? To say gut first, right? Gut brain interaction. So there's a lot of factors outside the brain that we think are really playing a role too, but trying to recognize that there's that relationship between them. So I don't know, do you have a favorite term or a way to approach this, or is there something that you think fits best?
I think it, at least from my perspective, that you're talking about that it is that, it's kind of an issue between the brain and the gut, right? Because they're both involved, right? Brain controls the gut, so um,
Right.
I kind of like to lean toward that. The functional, we had a podcast with this with Dr. Busvaros,
Oh, great.
talking about it, say the term functional, right? Because as a parent, I had no idea what that meant. People kept saying it to me, but I didn't know what it meant. I just kept going, there's something wrong, there's something wrong. And the functional part went way over my head for a pretty long time because it
Mm,
wasn't something I was used to talking about, right? There's a lot of terms that doctors use that patients don't understand, and I think that is one of them. So I think classifying it kind of as the disorder of the gut-brain interaction, it kind of gives it an overarching understanding that, look, there's a lot at play here. Um,
mhm.
so to me, I like the term.
Yeah, some people like it and some don't. One of my favorite terms that hasn't really caught any traction at all is neurogastroenterology. So neurogastroenterology, being again neuro, kind of brain, nerves, gastro being that combination with the gut. It
Mhm.
just that one's I think is going to be the lowest. If folks had to do a survey, I think that would end up being like the last one chosen.
People
But
don't hear about it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just I think everyone has a different take to your point, but I'm glad that DGBI is okay for you, and that's important, right? Because the last thing I want to do or anyone wants to do is be offensive with this, right?
Yeah.
Our goal is the opposite. Again, we really want to get the stigma away from these problems and try to find out more about the whys and hows, and then hopefully that leads to better treatments.
Absolutely. And I agree with the neurogastroenterology that does not have enough traction. Um, that was something I actually looked into very early with my son because we were trying to find
Uh,
somewhere to take him. They're hard to find. There's not I think enough focus on it, even as a subspecialty to get people to. But that is something that, something that our organization will tell people when, during
yeah.
support calls or in our online community, online groups, is talking about stuff like that because it really is a very niche field
Mhm.
that can be super helpful and super applicable to CVS. So thank you for
Yeah.
bringing that up. Before we dive specifically into CVS, can you tell me about how you became interested in DGBIs?
Sure. I think you touched on it in the introduction. I went into gastroenterology fellowship thinking that I was going to be a clinician and focused on IBD, so inflammatory bowel disease, seeing patients with Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. And while I was there, I just had a chance to work with a great mentor, who's Samuel Nurko. Got to see patients, and I think I still remember to this day taking care and being part of the team that taking care of a young adolescent female who just completely just broke down in tears, talking about how constipation and the incontinence episode she was having were affecting her life. And it was like a light bulb just like went off in my head. And I said, oh my gosh, like we do not know enough about how to take care of these problems. They're affecting children in a major way. It was at that point that I started shifting my focus towards DGBI and motility disorders, and then just really wanted to be part of, developing care teams, multidisciplinary care teams that help, and also trying to do more research in the area so that we can come up with better treatments. And I've had a chance to be able to do that and work with some great folks at Baylor College of Medicine, and then more recently here at Duke. So it's been a pleasure to do that, but there's still so much we need to learn.
Absolutely. I love that. The light bulb moment. Those are so impactful.
They really can be. And so my hope is, I mean, you described it as a niche, right? My hope is that others will continue to have their own light bulb moments, and particularly in CVS or other areas, and just really want to tackle this problem.
Me too. What do you what do you think about the gut-brain connection and how that is central to CVS?
Yeah, I think it's a disorder that really highlights the connection. I like to maybe just start with just vomiting. There's a vomiting reflux, and I suspect just about everyone in the world has vomited at least one time in their life, if not multiple times. And as we understand it, big picture wise, vomiting is an interaction between gut factors. So, for example, if you were to eat spoiled food, or you have a viral gastroenteritis that's really irritating your gut, sending signals towards your brain, and then brain factors, maybe like a lot of anxiety or stress or something like that. And those networks or those signals go and are integrated in your midbrain and an area called the medulla. And that medulla ends up coordinating once a certain threshold is hit. Some connection, the puzzle pieces come together and the medulla says, okay, it's time to vomit. You should go ahead and vomit. It ends up coordinating both the motor side of things. So, think about the retching that folks have, like the bending over, and autonomic changes. So think about like your heart rate getting faster. Folks start sweating and things like that when they vomit. And you can expel the contents that you have in your GI tract, for example.
Hmm.
And sometimes that's really helpful. That's great, right? So I talked about the spoiled food, right? If you had spoiled food and you ate it and you had this reflex that all came together from all the signals, it might save your life. Unfortunately, with cyclic vomiting syndrome, it's gone awry. And these gut factors and these brain factors are coming together. And for some reason, perhaps these factors are over, it's like the dial is turned up to 10 or something for some of these factors sending the signals, or at the level of the brain and how things are being integrated, the threshold to vomiting is too low, or something has changed it so that these episodes keep happening, in a repeated and stereotypic way. But then once you get past that, then you're back to baseline. You're back to how you were before. And that's why I think CVS is a perfect gut brain type of paradigm, because that we know from vomiting that has to happen.
Hmm. What are some of the factors that appear to be playing a role in CVS?
I think there are a lot. The one of that big central factor is neuronal hyperexcitability, or almost think about it as just too much function. Like it seems like the neuronal or nerve signals are just again dialed to 10. And folks have been looking at this to try to understand why. And, folks have started looking at genetic factors, for example, and there are what they call ion channels. So think about like electrolytes like salt and things like that that are abnormal or genetically. And for some reason, that's leading to the neurons acting incorrectly. There are other genetic factors looking at the endocannabinoid system. And how that may be playing a role. There can be genetic factors in that cyclic vomiting syndrome can run in families, and migraines can run in families. So we think that there are genetic factors that are playing a role there. And there are genetic factors as it relates to mitochondrial function, that folks have found in certain studies that children with CVS may have an overrepresentation of mitochondrial DNA alterations or variants that may be playing a role towards making the cyclic vomiting syndrome more likely. We're learning about factors in like the what we call chronobiology. So think about like the circadian rhythm and trying to think about how the body has functions that depend on the time of the day. And for folks who have a good circadian rhythm, I've been learning that it's incredible, like gene function and proteins and everything that are expressed tend to be expressed really well if you're in a good rhythm. But if your sleep is off or there's some other stressors or things are throwing you off, certain genes and functions in your body work at less capacity. And there's some thought that may be playing a role in cyclic vomiting syndrome. There are psychosocial factors, anxiety, depression, fear, catastrophizing, that folks are thinking play a role. There are endocrinologic factors. There are, as you know, certain types of CVS where it's menstrual related. And when menses happen, the estrogen levels are thought to go down, and somehow that's leading to cyclic vomiting syndrome. I think when children hit puberty, sometimes we see either onset of CVS or changes in how the CVS pattern is going on. So it certainly seems like hormones and your endocrine factors are playing a role. And then there's, some things in your gut, the microbiome. We don't have specific information on that in cyclic vomiting syndrome, but we know the gut and the microbiome are sending signals to your brain, and sending, as soon as you eat something, studies are showing through a certain type of cell known as the neuropod cell that literally within hundreds of a millisecond of you just eating sugar, your brain through the vagus nerve is getting a signal that you did that. And we're learning that the microbiome modulates that signal that your brain is receiving. So it's incredible. All these things are factors that ultimately are coming together to play a role. And then I think you mentioned, the brain ends up affecting the gut, right? And one of those is the autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system folks think about it as the fight or flight reflex. Things that measure that, alter like blood pressure, your heart rate, things of that nature that you don't really control yourself. Your brain is doing that through the autonomic nervous system. If you take a look at the autonomic nervous system in those with cyclic vomiting syndrome, it's off for some reason. When they do this testing, they see, for example, that the vagal nerve, which is really important for parasympathetic function and, signals from your gut going up to your brain, they're seeing that is not reacting the same in those with cyclic vomiting syndrome as compared to those who are healthy. And when they take a look at the sympathetic side of things, the things that tend to be up there with the fight or flight reflex, that's also abnormal sometimes in those with cyclic vomiting syndrome. So we're learning that all these factors are coming together and playing a role.
And you covered yeah, I mean, I feel like you just covered the whole rest of the questions I had for the podcast.
No, I think, I didn't get to
We'll
everything
break it
because
down.
there's even, the hypothalamic pituitary axis. There's
Hmm.
this variant known as the Sato variant, I believe,
Yeah.
where, when you have a stress for some reason, some folks have a HPA axis that revs up like cortisol and ACTH and all these things way beyond what folks would typically want to be seen. And that ends up triggering or being part of the kind of CVS picture. So it's really it's a big puzzle.
Big.
And each one of these factors may play more of a role in one patient that we're seeing as compared to another patient. And that can make it challenging in terms of trying to find the right treatment.
I think a lot of that plays into because it took us a long time to realize, us personally, um, that there were subtypes of CVS, right? And I always
Yes.
wonder if we knew, if some of those factors that you're talking about are specific to one or two of the subtypes, right? So you talk about
Yes.
the autonomic nervous system and the SOTO variant, as my son, his blood pressure was always so high. But a lot of that was, is it just because he's dehydrated, right? But it was
Mhm.
like um, he has the tachycardia, very high heart rate. Uh, anyhow, right? So he's
Oh,
already on
anyhow.
that,
Okay.
on kind of that spectrum, right? So yeah, it's alarming sometimes to see when your kid is just sitting there that his heart rate's like 125. It's just like you're just like that would take somebody else out, right? But he's just
Yeah. And you're hitting a really good point, which is, right, you can find these sometimes when you're looking at somebody and they look fine.
Mhm.
Right? Some of this testing on the autonomic nervous system are done in between episodes. It's not like right during a vomiting episode.
Right.
So it's really highlighting well, like in your son, that for some reason the signals are a little bit off, and just kind
Mhm.
of think about that then as the threshold to get to the vomiting is lower.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I've pushed his doctors quite a lot, and it was, we noticed more things after he got pretty stabilized, that had to do with the autonomic nervous system.
Hmm.
He has the blood pooling. His doctor just kept telling him it was allergies, but he stands up for more than like 3 minutes and his lower legs turn like bright red. And it's just like, no, I'm pretty sure there's something else going on there because otherwise it wouldn't be, an issue. But we didn't fight it too much because we already, he was already kind of working towards stable. Um, so, it's something we should push more later, I guess. Or if it's, something you're concerned about, definitely. I kind of just went, I'm pretty sure I know what it is.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a great point because the treatments with autonomic, and I'm not a dysautonomia expert, right? But there are therapies, really geared towards that even.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and it sounds like maybe you found some other therapies or other things for Jason that
yeah.
may not have been specific to that, but for others
Right.
that may be needed.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Well, I always say trust your mom gut.
Hmm.
If you
Absolutely.
if you think it's an issue, then you need to push for it. Why do you think CVS episodes are commonly triggered by stress, infections, or even certain foods?
Yeah, it's a head scratcher, right? Sometimes these stressors are positive. I've heard of stressors where, a family's about to go to Disney World or something. And that leads to, this terrible timing, right? You're about to go on this trip and then, a CBS episode starts.
Hmm.
I think I'm guessing here, but I think there's like two levels to this. One is like this overarching level where, I was talking about chronobiology, or, having your body kind of be used to a certain steady state, and it keeps that threshold under control. And so if that stressor that you're talking about, either disrupts your sleep, or you get a fever from it, or something else that throws you off in terms of keeping things calm, that threshold is going to end up getting lower. So you're more likely to have a CVS episode. And then it gets down to, well, what is that stressor itself exactly? So, for example, if it's like stress. Um, your central nervous system is sending signals to that medulla, down that pathway. Your hypothalamic pituitary axis is revved up. You're sending more cortisol or something now to that system. So that's going to lower the threshold potentially, and that might trigger an episode. If it's food related, maybe there's something related to the food in terms of how it's altering how your gut is sending signals to the brain after it gets it. Or maybe it's altering the motility, how things are moving through, and that's going to send something to the brain to cause an issue. So that's my hypothesis anyway, that these in terms of how these triggers may be playing a role.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's one thing that comes up a lot, as you can imagine, people asking. And it's like, well, it's not stress. It was like Christmas or a birthday party. And I'm like, that is still stress, right?
Positive stress, right?
It's
A positive
positive
stressor.
stress.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah,
yes.
for sure. So trying to explain that to people and, going, no, it is still a stress on your system because you're hyper excited, right? Or so it still
Yeah.
takes a toll. So, and it's really challenging when people have that because then they don't want to travel, they don't want to, you know, um, oh, my son getting his driver's license
Oh gosh. Yeah.
was, because and that's not really a positive stress. He was just stressed about,
Oh.
having to do it. And um, for us, it was, trying to find a way to help mitigate the stress response, right? Because
Mhm.
he's going to kill me for saying this, so whatever. Is he went for his driver's license 4 different times, and ended up
Okay.
in an episode every single time.
Oh my gosh.
So the very
Wow.
last one, I'm just going to set up the appointment and not tell him and just have him drive me to DMV where he takes his test because that way he doesn't have time to really think about it and stress about it. And he passed and it was no issues. So for us, it was
Awesome.
learning how to mitigate a lot of those challenges. So I appreciate that. It's just I tend to overthink everything and
No,
you know,
it doesn't sound like overthinking. I mean, it sounds like the way you had to approach it. There may be
yeah.
families, for example, that say, hey, there's no way we should, get an early AM appointment for something
Hmm.
like that, because that means my son or my daughter is going to have to get up super early because we have to travel 2 hours to get there. So let's make
Hmm.
sure the appointment's at 11 or something, right? And there are strategies like that, we need to take. And by the way, it's
Yeah.
not just CVS, right? I know we
Yes.
might get into the migraine, but this is all, lifestyle factors affect other things like migraine. It's well known that if you get poor sleep, it's a risk factor for having a migraine attack.
Hmm.
Also for the kids that I'm seeing with gut pain, whether it be irritable bowel syndrome or dyspepsia, there's studies really showing really nicely that poor sleep the night before increases the risk of having more belly pain the next day.
Hmm.
And so having that, again, kind of thinking about that threshold for your body in terms of all these interactions and how your brain's working with your gut, sometimes good sleep really goes a long way.
Yeah, that's I think we have that a little further into our questions, but
Yeah, happy
um
to.
yeah, my Dr. Beely um, talks about that and trying to find modifications that can help. So his was always late start, right? If you could
Mm,
work with the school to do a late start, that was one of the things that we worked with my son on is not having to go, super early. He could miss like his first period class. That was written into his 504.
nice.
Trying to
Hmm.
find ways to modify when we knew something was a trigger. Um, so yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that. And we'll probably touch on it a little bit later.
Sure.
Um,
Happy to.
you were mentioning nerve excitability and pathways. Is there a way we start seeing connection with migraine with that?
Yeah, I think so. The this is my analogy and my kind of my hypothesis. So please, this is not going to be found in a textbook or journal article somewhere. But if you look at the literature, they will definitely say there seems to be this common pathway, this common factor of neuronal hyperexcitability. And and I think that it kind of explains then, well, why are things so episodic, right? So it's for some reason this neuronal these nerves start get excited intermittently, and it leads to the symptom. The reason I think that I think that's where that happens and then it's important. But if you take the analogy of, let's say you're going to a national park, and in the national park, and if you look, the 30,000-foot view, you see these tremendous trees everywhere, let's say, and there's mountains and topography and different things. But if you go down a little closer, you'll see trails. You'll see like a road, where cars are going through. You'll see trails where people are hiking. And it's a lot easier to get from one place in this huge national park to another, depending on the trail or the path that's there. And for cyclic vomiting, for whatever reason, that trail goes from all these factors in the brain goes to the vomiting areas in your midbrain. And you're more likely to have then therefore CVS. And if we were to continue to use that analogy, let's say you're a hiker and you're going, through this national park to go from one part to the other part. For most people or healthy people, it's an uphill climb. If to climb up to go to point B, you're going to have to bring a walking stick and maybe some climbing gear to get there, but you'll get there.
Mm-hmm.
But for the folks for cyclic vomiting syndrome, it's not high, it's lower for some reason. And they can get from point A to point B faster. And in this case, you don't want it to be faster, but it just happens to be a lot easier to get there. With migraine, my hypothesis is the pathways, the trails are different. You still have neuronal hyperexcitability, you still have hikers and folks kind of going through the forest, but instead of going to the vomiting center, the trails and the pathways and the connections are going to the meninges or going somewhere else, that leads to more of the migraine picture. And unfortunately, as you know, there are folks who have both those pathways, have both CVS and migraine at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And so those pathways are happening. They're going to the vomiting center, they're going to the meninges or with the migraine factors. And unfortunately for them, those pathways are established in both.
Nice. You're talking about that, and all I can picture is somebody jumping off in a squirrel suit. We're not even following a path.
Right. And if you want, and everyone's free to do this, you go to the national park and you say, I'm not going to take any trails, right? I can go from wherever I want, and that's fine. Obviously, it's going to be a lot slower, right? And you choose your own adventure, right? In terms of which trees and which ways you want to go through and what have you. So that's also a possibility. But in terms of like ease, right? How easy is it to get from one place to another within that huge park? Tends to be easier to go through the trails.
Or the squirrel suit.
Squirrel suit, yeah. Or if there's a grizzly bear running after you, it doesn't matter where the trail is, right? You're just
That's right.
gonna run.
You just go.
But in any case,
Man, the excitability on that one with the grizzly chasing you.
exactly.
Why do some people develop cyclic vomiting syndromes, even with similar risk factors, like migraine, do not?
Yeah, I think if we were to continue to go with that analogy, it's that those pathways that are in that person's brain, those connections that are there are leading most likely more towards the vomiting center. And once that neuronal hyperexcitability happens, it just unfortunately leads there. And they've done some functional MRI studies. They've looked at this question and they've seen that the brain of those with cyclic vomiting syndrome reacts differently. There's different connections that light up or don't light up in those with cyclic vomiting syndrome as compared to those who are healthy. They've seen this in children, they've seen this in adults. And so this connectivity or this connection idea data seems to suggest that it holds some water, but I think we still have a long way to go to figure this out.
Of course. Do you think there is overlap with migraine biology and CVS?
I do. And it may relate again to, we keep talking about the nerves and hyperexcitability, but that's probably where there's a lot of overlap. folks have looked at and have found, and I was looking at this a little bit only, and I'm certainly not an expert, there were over 100 different genes that folks have found in migraine that can lead to you being more likely to have this problem. Folks have not looked at yet to the same degree whether those same genes are involved in cyclic vomiting syndrome. But there's likely to be some, I think if folks look at it, there's likely to be some overlap there. And then there is some overlap with this mitochondrial question. At least for some folks, that seems to overlap in terms of the migraine and the CVS. So there's definitely some connections there.
And that's why the migraine medications are used so much in treating CVS.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're hitting it on the head. Think about, I wish there were some ways that we could go into the brain and say, okay, let's stop this trail from being formed. Let's no longer go to the vomiting center. Let's make it an uphill climb so that doesn't happen. We don't quite have that necessarily in 2025. What we have is let's perhaps use these medications to slow down how fast you can travel, or something like that. So the nerves are not as excitable overall.
Yeah, noticed a huge difference in treating my son when we finally did find a neurologist that was able to kind of review his stuff. And it took a while, but she was able to identify that he had, because he has regular head migraines, abdominal migraines, and CVS.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
So
yeah, the trifecta.
So apparently he is the one in the squirrel suit.
Oh gosh. Unfortunately for him, right? He had all those
Yes.
pathways laid down.
Yeah. So it was literally like his brain would wake up and go, okay, which trail do I want to take today? So
exactly.
It's very interesting that it can have that, right?
Yes.
Because a lot of people think that abdominal migraine and CVS are the same. So it's very interesting to talk to people and go, that they are different. They're actually considered different conditions. Emergency rooms, that's 100% what I'm going to say. It's an abdominal migraine because I'll treat it a little bit better.
Yeah, and you were teaching me that, which makes sense, and
Yeah,
it's helpful to really get out there. Thank you for educating me on that. That it seems like folks seem to understand this concept of migraine better,
right.
than CVS.
Yeah. Let's see. How do you think researchers are trying to better understand this overlap with migraine?
Yeah, we've chatted about it a little bit. It probably, relates to, these functional MRIs, looking at how the brain is interconnected and how it responds to different, ways to stimulate the brain to see if there's some relationship. Probably it relates to looking at the genes, to see if there's overlap with ion channels or endocannabinoid system, or for others. I think in migraine, there's this calcitonin related pathway that folks are, related gene pathway that folks are really interested in. Love to see if researchers could, try to see if that's also involved in cyclic vomiting syndrome. And
I agree. I agree.
there's just, I think folks are, constantly thinking about these connections and how we can borrow from like how things are so interconnected in terms of treatments. And if you take a look at the latest NASPGAN guidelines, which I think you may have on your website, right?
Yep, it's on the website. Thank you.
So definitely recommend going to your website. Is some treatments there are better. There's better evidence in migraine than they are in CVS, and yet really good pickup. The experts there, including Dr. Corrento and others, are saying, hey, let's go ahead and use these migraine treatments then, since there's so much overlap, to try to help with CVS.
And we have seen people that are dipping into using the CGRPs for that
Nice.
calcium. Yeah.
Hopefully that's working. Hopefully it's working well. I'd love to see, for example, in those who, like your son, had both, unfortunately, or have both migraine and CVS, in terms of, well, what does the CGRP related medication do? Yeah, what does it do? Does it only help one? Does it help both?
Yeah.
That would be really helpful.
I think so too. I agree, especially because in this, we'll probably get to this, but in the patients that transition from CVS to migraines, right? Is that something
Hmm.
that's unfortunately, my son was not one that outgrew it, so we'll probably talk about that a little bit later. But if that is something that is going to be applicable to
That
people in
would
those
be
instances.
that would be really fabulous.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, happy to jump into that too, maybe a little bit if you think now, but uh, yeah, if we're gonna use that trail analogy, right, in terms of or the pathways analogy,
Hmm.
anything you can do to keep folks from having to keep going on that trail,
Yeah.
right? Anything you can do to keep CVS episodes from happening as frequently. Hopefully it makes that trail kind of get overgrown, right? Or the vegetation starts growing on it, and those
Hmm.
pathways in your brain, for example, stop getting used as much. And our brains have plasticity, right? Different connections are happening. We're laying down memories all the time. We're thinking about things, and um, as we get older, unfortunately, right, we start forgetting things, and some connections are kind of going away. Um, but our brains are changing, right? Neurons are changing and things. So it'd be incredible if like a medication, like you're saying, could, help stop certain pathways from forming. That would be really neat.
That would be. It's um, yeah, imagine that. You just maybe sit there and think about it, just going, gosh, that would be life-changing, right?
It could be.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
Why do you think some kids transition to migraines while others continue to have CVS?
I'm not 100% sure. My guess would be kind of going along this plasticity aspect, but also development,
Hmm.
right? We talked about puberty. Um, and with that, you're having, different neurohormonal changes, whether it be estrogen or testosterone or other aspects that are happening. Um, and then you have just maturity, right? Cognitively, how you're thinking about things, how you're processing things. You're changing as a person
Hmm.
over time, both physiologically and also just how, again, psychologically. And I think folks who have adolescents can tell you their adolescents are very different in how they interact with their parents compared to when they're younger. Um, all those things are playing a role, I think, in terms of determining whether or not those connections within the brain, or again, using the analogy trails, those trails that you may have, either change, right? Now, instead of perhaps going towards the vomiting center in CVS, now they're going more towards, if you develop migraines, more towards those migraine pathways. Or maybe you're really fortunate and you're somebody who has CVS and you don't develop migraines or anything anymore. Like it's gone.
Hmm.
And maybe that development happens and those trails get overgrown, right? It's no longer, or the height changes and it's really high now. So it's really difficult for, those pathways to get to the vomiting centers now. And that would be a great thing. What I would
Absolutely.
love is in 2025, or, folks and researchers can figure out, well, let's take advantage of that in kids. Kids in particular seem to be, perhaps at a good point because we're seeing these transitions happen. How can we promote that transition? How can we promote it so it doesn't go to migraine? How can we promote it so it goes to, health?
Right.
That would be fascinating. And we need a lot smarter folks than me, neuroscientists, families working together, research coalitions. Like, how do we do that? We may not have the answer in 2025, but how do we get it by 2030?
Right.
So that, when somebody comes to see a doctor and says, I have CVS, I would like not to have CVS or migraines or anything by the time I'm, 5 years from now. Help me do that. Help me get there. I'd love to see if we can ever figure that out.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Really
For
making me think
sure.
about it. And I'm like, oh,
That's the goal, right? Those types of things would be the goal for sure.
yeah. Yeah. I think not having anybody have to suffer, would be amazing. It really would. Well, let's talk about the microbiome, the gut microbiome that we kind of touched on earlier, and it's supporting, migraine treatment, which can also help with CVS. Um, It was very popular for a bit. It seems to me it might have tapered off a little bit, I guess, where you are as a provider, and what you're being exposed to. But having an altered diet to support, the migraine microbiome. Part of my son Jason's treatment for his abdominal migraine care plan was to try this diet. But before I share if it was helpful or not, do you
Mm.
feel like this could be helpful in treating CVS?
I think the short answer is that there's a lot of potential, but in 2025 anyway, we're not there yet in terms of being able to tell a family or tell someone who's an adult with CVS what to do in terms of how to help with the microbiome. So
Hmm.
what do I mean? So in terms of potential, we are learning, and some of my research in irritable bowel syndrome is related to diet and the microbiome, for example. And we're learning that depending on when you eat certain foods, and in my studies, we're looking at something called fructans, which are a type of sugar that you find in wheat and onions. And if a child eats that with IBS and they have a certain type of microbiome and a certain type of microbiome reaction, they can develop belly pain. But if their microbiome is different, we're learning they don't develop belly pain. So we're seeing that the microbiome can be really important in terms of that. And what I found was really fascinating when I was trying to look into this a little bit more is that there was a study or studies looking at hyperemesis gravidarum. So this is that a lot of nausea and the vomiting that happens during pregnancy. So talk about like neurohormonal changes, right?
Hmm.
And unfortunately, this can be terrible, right? Leading to dehydration and other aspects for women who are pregnant. They've looked at the gut microbiome here, and they're finding that those who have hyperemesis gravidarum have a different gut microbiome as compared to those who don't. Um, and so again, really fascinating. No one's looked at this really deeply in CVS, as far as I know. They have started to look at this in migraine, and are seeing some interesting differences as far as I know. But no one in 2025 can come to you and say, hey, because you have this gut microbiome, you should do this or you should do that to try to help. And the microbiome, I know we have disorders of gut-brain interaction, but some folks talk about the axis being not just between the gut and the brain, but also including the microbiome in there. And so they'll say gut-brain, gut microbiome brain axis or something along those lines.
Hmm.
And we talked a little bit about why, right? So the microbiome is able to send signals or modulate signals that are going to your brain. The microbiome is able to produce metabolites like short chain fatty acids or change, bile salts so that they go directly to your brain and actually can modify, how your brain is perceiving things, or maybe even they may even submit like they may even produce or modulate like neurotransmitters so that your brain function may be different. And the microbiome can send and lead to different signals that are going through the vagus nerve or afferent system in terms of the signals again going to your brain. And so we're learning more and more and more about that. And that's what I mean by the potential. There's tremendous potential there to be
Hmm.
able to change the microbiome so that it can help with CVS. But at least in 2025, we're still not there yet in terms of a certain diet or certain probiotic or certain prebiotic or
Hmm.
symbiotics or others to say that that's the right one for you. I suspect it's because it's not that straightforward. I suspect it's because it's going to end up being really personalized. And we already know that if you take two super healthy people and you look at their gut microbiome, you're likely to find completely different composition or populations there.
Yeah,
And
that
yet they're
makes
both
sense.
healthy. They're both completely healthy. And so folks are really looking at, well, then what is it that the microbiome is doing? And that's why it may end up being more of us coming up with strategies to change what your microbiome is doing, as opposed to changes in terms of, changing the composition.
That makes sense. Makes
We'll
sense.
see. We'll see. I have no idea. What again, this is another maybe 2030 idea. I hope it doesn't take that long.
Oh,
But
that's what
this
I
may
was just
be,
thinking. We're on the
yeah.
early side of it. So although people are
Hmm.
gung ho about here, you should try this, it may still be on the early side to see whether or not it's a definitive for being an option for treating.
Yeah. But if folks, are out there and, they're what are things that we think are related to health, right? Just in general. We talk about fiber, right? Dietary fiber and just and being able to eat that. And as Americans, we're terrible about that. If you look at surveys on dietary fiber, we are falling super, super, super short, and
Mhm.
also in children, unfortunately. And then there's a lot of interest in this area known as fermentable foods.
Yes.
So things like yogurt, and things like kimchi
Kimchi.
or sauerkraut or what is it, kefir. Folks are very excited about these types of foods because they're associating, eating these foods. And I think there was a study from a lab in California from the Sonnenberg lab, where at least in their study, it suggested that inflammatory markers, that were found in the blood would go down in those who are eating a lot of fermented foods. So, and then there's studies looking at, using fermented foods to regulate bowel habits and things of that nature. So, when I'm saying that we're not there yet in 2025 is it's only because we haven't quite, figured out for CVS, what should you do? But I
Right.
think we're learning more and more. And if ultimately you taking these things helps you, and we talked about get to a steady state, get to a healthy state so you can increase the threshold, that would be great. I
Hmm.
just wish we had the evidence for that.
Yeah, I agree. It's was something we were very hopeful for. Very challenging for a kid with CVS who, you
Yeah.
know, you learn to have different outlooks on foods and how you feel about them after they've come up several times.
Oh gosh.
So that it was hard to even try and do that.
Hmm.
But yeah, we tried it. It unfortunately didn't work, but for CVS, we would try and pretty much anything. If somebody told us walking on the moon would be helpful, we probably
Hmm.
would have tried it. So it's sad that you get to that
I
degree,
know.
but it happens.
I know, and I completely get it, right? I mean, your child in this case, right, is suffering, and
Hmm.
you're really trying to do something that, you're hoping in the big picture is not going to be harmful and may
Right?
be beneficial, right? You're hoping that anyway. So
That could be
completely get it.
that could be a
At
whole
this,
other podcast because
yeah,
yeah.
and yeah, and at the same time,
Mm.
there's always that concern, both financially sometimes for some
Yeah.
families, right?
Hmm.
Some of these treatments, and I'm not sure which ones, specific ones you all try, but sometimes some of these things are expensive.
Hmm.
And again, if they don't have evidence behind them, I think I worry, right? As a physician, like some of our credo is do no harm.
Hmm.
Um, and do no harm, we can think about it as being on the physiologic side or medicine side.
Hmm.
But that's a small take on that because we
Yes,
live in the real world and food insecurity and financial instability and housing and all these things play a role in health. And so,
definitely.
for example, there are studies that suggest that recommending a change in the diet, for example, the gluten-free diet for celiac or for folks who are gluten sensitive, increases the risk of folks getting food insecurity.
Yeah.
That devastates me, right? Especially I mean, of course, if it works, that'd be incredible. But that would devastate me if I recommended something like that and it made a family food insecure.
Hmm.
So that's why sometimes I think doctors come at it from a, hey, let's try to get some evidence standpoint.
Yes.
And maybe folks don't like that. Maybe you yourself and your family have a different threshold to that, and that's okay. I mean,
Hmm.
that's why we have these discussions, right? In
Right.
terms of
Absolutely.
trying
Yeah.
trying to figure it out.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because that was something that we very much worked with my son's doctor on. Because when, his episodes were 2 weeks long, and taking
Wow.
him to the emergency room, every day for 2 weeks was just not financially feasible, right?
No, no,
So
not at
we
all.
we literally had to go back to the doctor and go, I can't do this. We can't survive financially paying $500 just to get an IV in him every day. So, worked with them to set up a plan for infusion. So, So every time he would have, yeah, an episode getting the
Smart.
infusion. But then that led to its own issues because
Yes.
there were plenty of days that we would be in infusion for, up to 8 hours. So entire day we would be sitting in infusion from the time it opened to the time it
Oh my
closed.
gosh.
And the nurses would go, you need to take him to the emergency room. He is still dehydrated. Even with the 4 bags of fluid he would get
Mm,
sitting there, he was still dehydrated. So it helped, but there was,
yeah.
but we'd go to the emergency room and, at points like that, he probably should have been admitted, but the
Hmm.
emergency room doctors were going, no, he's getting care. So they wouldn't admit him. So we struggled because we were always, what I would call falling through the cracks, right? We needed somebody to help us. Somebody was helping us. It just wasn't where it should have been. Um, but it's one of those things that we learned too late, you know.
Yeah. Well,
But talk
sounds,
with your doctors and find out what
yes.
options are available.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, it sounds like you developed, and unfortunately you had to, right? But you developed partnerships with folks.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
and I mean, we should be clear, right? Infusions are not a typical,
No, they
therapy
are
to
not. Thank you.
have to set
Hmm.
up and things of that nature. However, in those cases where like you had with your son, I mean,
A
when you're trying to come up
severe
with
long
ways
episode.
to try to right,
Yeah.
try to stop that, certainly had to do that for some patients myself. And
Yeah.
it can be helpful. And there's some thought to, and I think Dr. Parento was teaching me this, trying to address an attack early,
Yes.
right? Rather
Yep.
rather than waiting. And I know we're not going to go into too much treatment today, which is great. I think we've been chatting for a while and happy to chat more. But right, attacking it early, like you guys were doing,
Yeah.
can really be helpful.
Yeah. Well, and I think learning when to take those abortives and stuff can be very
Right,
helpful. So,
right.
all right, let's talk about catamenial CVS. This is
Hmm.
considered a subtype of CVS that impacts females around the time of their menses. Personally, I like to look at it from more of just a hormone direction, like you were kind of mentioning earlier,
Hmm.
because I felt like the growth hormones may get overlooked just a bit when it comes to CVS. That's what I feel. Jason's episodes were always super challenging anytime he had a growth spurt. So in my mind, I related the two. This is like the male version of the hormones, although I'm
Hmm.
sure it probably impacts everybody, right? Um,
Sure.
so why is this a thing? And does catamenial CVS tie into or have association with menstrual migraine?
Yeah, great questions. This is not an area of expertise for me, but in terms of what I was taking a look at and have read, the physiology seems to be related to a decrease in the amount of estrogen that happens right there before the menstruation. And it's thought that that neurohormonal change ends up affecting neuronal excitability and changing the autonomic nervous system. Again, we talked about that threshold, right? And so now here you are modifying those things and probably changing the threshold and maybe increasing the risk of having a CVS attack.
Hmm.
Um, it's thought that that exact same mechanism is playing a role in the migraine-related catamenial migraine or menstrual-related migraine.
Hmm.
And it kind of gets again to that overlap between the two, right? With the neuronal excitability playing a role. There are probably other hormones for sure that are playing a role. I think we talked about cortisol. There's probably some others related to the HPA axis, maybe progesterone. I couldn't find something specific to growth hormone, but I that doesn't mean that it's not playing a role. I wonder if that also speaks to just puberty too,
Yes.
right? That maybe your son was going through. So
Yep.
now we're definitely talking about testosterone there, and talking about other changes that are
Hmm.
happening just developmentally within his brain. Um, and so I think there's a long way to go to figure out about all the factors, hormonal factors that are playing a role.
Hmm. Yeah, it's because I do see a lot of males around the same time that my
Mhm.
son's stuff kind of went bananas. So yeah, puberty growth. I mean, in my mind they're the same. I'm sure they're different, but in my mind they're the same.
Yeah, growth is a result of the pubertal changes, right? We're
Hmm.
getting growth, we're getting axillary hair, we're developing different types of musculature, and Yeah, no, there's a lot of changes that are happening during puberty.
Yeah. You talk about sleep impacting
Mm,
um, people, and I mean, it can do, like you were saying with migraine, it really plays into migraine a lot. You don't get a lot of sleep. It can be a trigger for people's migraine. Um, we've got that a lot with
mm.
CVS. If you ask my son, just top two things that you felt helped your CVS. Sleep will 100% be the top change he made that helped over and above any medication that he ever took,
Wow.
that he ever
Okay.
tried.
Mm.
His doctor worked with him to go, okay, you need X number of hours of sleep. So he had to get he ended up, and he still does. We're talking, this is, over 10 years later, he still sticks to this exact sleep schedule. He's afraid if he changes it at all, something catastrophic will happen. But, probably the only
Yeah.
13-year-old you would know that would have a sleepover, and everybody had to go to bed at 9 o'clock.
Love it.
He
Yeah, tell that to my
still,
middle daughter. Like, I don't
uh,
know what time she stays up to on these sleepovers, but it's very important.
yeah,
You're right. Sorry,
it's
sorry, I
very,
interrupted. I
no,
apologize.
no, we're talking. That's part of it. So, but it is. It still blows me away. He's still absolutely, nope, we need to get this amount of sleep, so that lifestyle modification was completely life-changing for him. Um, in figuring out that that definitely factored into his triggers. Um, and even now we will, when we travel, sometimes I'll do you can sleep while we travel. So we'll travel overnight so that it doesn't disrupt his sleep schedule.
Smart.
It's,
Yeah.
we don't understand how much CVS and the way we work around CVS even still impacts us to this day. But yeah, that, him changing his sleep schedule. So, um, how do you feel some of these lifestyle factors like sleep, hydration? Hydration's his number two. Just
Hmm.
so you know, sleep and hydration are his top two lifestyle factors that change things for him. So, um, do you feel like that would make a big difference in CVS outcomes?
Yeah, great question. My guess would be yes, that it really would be an important role. Um, they talk about, I guess the concept that's what's coming to mind is resilience, taking care of yourself.
Hmm.
So one of those is sleep is so important. We talked
Hmm.
about chronobiology and the circadian rhythm. So if you are, and it sounds like your son had to do this, you go to sleep at the exact same time every night, and hopefully you get enough, sleep. Um, and you wake up at exactly the same time, ideally when the sun is out and it's bright, right? And it's sending signals to your brain. That way, you are likely to increase your resilience and your health and be able to take on stressors in a better way.
Hmm.
Just in general in life, and then probably, particularly related to things where you're susceptible to stressors like CVS. And the same thing with hydration, right? If you think about how do you keep yourself healthy, right? A lot of us don't drink enough. A lot of us aren't taking care of ourselves enough. And so, yes, I think those lifestyle factors are really important to health, and then in CVS to maintain that threshold,
Hmm.
to make it as high as you can for yourself, so that you don't go into another episode.
Yeah, we use a lot of oral hydration supplements.
Perfect.
When we're traveling, especially, we have a 3-day protocol. We start before we travel.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That includes the oral hydration, right? Because it's even with
Hmm.
migraines, I have migraines, which is why my son has migraines and CVS. And that's a big one with migraines too, is the dehydration,
Hmm.
that it can really impact that along with the sleep. Um, so I feel like me having migraines helped us be able to deal with CVS better, um, because I know a lot of my triggers, and now we can look at each other and I'm like, oh, you, and he's like, uh-huh. It's like you just know. And I'm like, yeah, there's a storm coming. There's,
Yeah,
the human barometer.
unfortunately, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Definitely
yep.
know about sleep. I was joking about my middle daughter, but you're reminding me that we saw a connection between her migraines and sleep.
Hmm.
When she would stay and have those sleepovers overnight, or we left her with we'd leave her with her phone. She's 14 now,
Hmm.
uh, and of course she'd be on it way too late at night. There were days where she would miss school because she would have migraines the next day. So we've had to be very regimented like you.
Hmm.
No phones after a certain time, sleep by a certain time. And really it's made a difference.
Yeah,
So I can only imagine that other families should probably think about doing the same for CVS.
I agree. I agree. Dr. Beely was once, when talking about that, the earlier start times for school, right? How
Mhm.
it really, because of that circadian rhythm, um,
Yes.
can affect some of the kids with CVS. And then something else that he mentioned was the like abrupt changes, right? Because your system needs more of a glide versus a
Hmm. Right.
um, so that's one of the things that we, even with our sleep patterns, when he's getting ready to go back to school or whatever, it's like 2 weeks before we start bringing, his time back to, if
Hmm.
it's 9 o'clock and he's been staying up till 10 or 11, it's like 15 minutes each night. So no abrupt changes. Everything's got to be kind
Smart.
of slow and even. So yeah, see, so that's why it takes us so long to do all these things.
Yes. And you're very intentional about it, right? Which is
Yeah.
great.
Hmm.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
when you notice that big of a difference, then, like your daughter's
Right.
migraines, you definitely, yeah,
It's
you
very
stick
reinforcing,
to it.
right? No, we
Yes.
stick to it. You say,
Yeah.
okay, we gotta keep doing this. We don't want to have one of us have to stay home at work from work, and
Hmm.
it's very disruptive for families, right?
Yeah.
These episodic type of problems that happen.
Yeah, for sure. Let's jump into a deep end, the deep end with this
Uh-oh.
question.
Okay. I thought we were in the deep end already. What's
I mean, it's CVS. We are in the deep end, right?
okay.
Why do you think it's so difficult for CVS to be recognized?
In terms of like the diagnosis or
Y-
um
Like it all,
like
it
at all.
it seems. I mean, you could go either direction with that, but um, it just seemed, for us, I'm not going to promote Dr. Google, but I did take CVS to my son's doctor, like a
Mm.
year or two before he was ever even diagnosed. So it takes a while, right? And it's
Yeah,
not something that
unfortunately.
the doctor had never even heard of CVS,
Yeah.
which is unfortunately quite common because the textbooks I've seen have maybe a paragraph if you're lucky, right? 3, 4 lines that talk about CVS. That does not encompass all of CVS at all.
I I'm laughing because I think they probably did. My hope would be that it's longer now, but I don't know. There are probably a couple of factors. I'd be guessing at this, but you probably hit on one big one already, which is just recognition from physicians and others about the problem.
Hmm.
And so this podcast, this CVSA, what it's doing is fabulous. I mean, that's exactly what is needed. I've seen you all at conferences. I've seen you all at DDW, which is the Digestive Disease Week. And you're trying to get this word out to all the gastroenterologists, both adult and pediatric. So kudos to you all. Keep going, please.
Keep pushing.
Your website, things like that is good. Like we need it. Or the field, like the patient, like we all need
Hmm.
it. I think the second maybe, as I think about it, what I hear from families is often that, hey, I've had, my child had these episodes and it was attributed to a viral gastroenteritis. And, the vomiting, they got sick, they got dehydrated, admitted, so the first few times this happens, and especially if these episodes, are rather far apart, um, or there's a clear stressor like a fever or something like an illness or bacterial infection, I think it makes sense for the physicians or those taking care of those patients to attribute it more towards something like that.
Definitely.
Especially if it's the first time or the second time and third. Once it starts becoming a pattern, right? You're like, uh-oh, wait a second here. Is there something else that's going on here? So here we are now. It's prolonged the diagnosis time, right? From the
Hmm.
first symptom to then. And then the next thing is, what we're taught, and I think that this third factor comes in a role, and I think this is good in some ways, is we should make sure it's not something else.
Yes.
And some folks, NASPGHAN recently came out with some updated advice on what should be done diagnostically.
Hmm.
Um, not everyone follows these guidelines. Some folks do a lot of testing before they feel very comfortable saying it's CVS for a child or perhaps for an adult. Some folks feel less testing is necessary, for that. And it obviously probably depends on the patient, right? For example, we talked about genetics. So, and you said you had migraine. That's one of the questions we would ask is there anybody in the family who has migraine? And more than 80% of those with CVS will either have a family history or they themselves have migraine. And that's why we ask. So if somebody says yes, you're like, okay, so that supports CVS,
Right.
but you may still do additional testing, right?
Hmm.
So that'll slow the diagnosis down, right, in terms of getting the testing done. And then um, finally, it's just like the medical system. There usually it has to be like a longitudinal like relationship with somebody to say, okay, this is, after the testing's done, you sit down, you have these discussions, you make that diagnosis. I'm probably missing other factors your family went through. Um, but hopefully I've hit on some of them. I don't know. Do you agree with some of these or do you feel like,
Well, we had a lot of problems with our testing. And
hmm,
sometimes it would be, 6 months in between when they would do a test, right?
there you go. Yeah.
Um, but, I mean, if you look at his history, it was January one year, and his episodes are every 2 weeks. So it is absolutely very,
Oh,
by the book, repetitive. And every time it's the flu, it's the flu. I'm like, by the third time, I'm like, he just had the flu. And, the response I would get
mm,
was, there's, hundreds of strains, thousands of strains of the flu. By the fourth and fifth time, because his was 2 weeks vomiting, 2 weeks fine, 2 weeks vomiting. It was very, um, it took me just pushing back, going, there has got to be something else. This is not just the flu, to get somebody to look and do something. But it still took a very long time to go through all those tests. So it was hard.
sorry to hear
And
that.
and
Yeah.
then to find out some of the tests were done wrong
Oh
later
no.
on. It was
Oh no.
yeah, when you get a brain MRI and they don't get from here up.
Oh gosh. I'm sorry. I'm apologizing for us and the medical profession as a whole. I think we're
But
all we're all susceptible to human error sometimes, but
yes,
yeah.
yeah, but we found that out because somebody sat down and went through his stuff with us, right? And that's what it
Mm,
took. It took getting somebody who was empathetic and understanding and really wanted to know what was going on, not just, here, try this pill, wait
mhm.
6 weeks, whatever, for to see if it helped. They actually went back and went through all of this stuff. So, but it took a lot for us to get there. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Yes, hopefully that we'll get to with all, awareness, testing being more focused done
Yes.
correctly.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we'll be able to start shortening the time frame between initial presentation to diagnosis.
Yeah.
Um, but
Because it,
and this podcast is part of that, right? This your
that's
series
right.
and the folks you're chatting with and getting on here, and that's all part of this effort.
And talking about it, right? Because people connect
Hmm.
even, just hearing some of the stories, right? Um,
Yes.
because you have a lot of kids that are just like, oh, I was pukey as a kid, because that's really where we got to with my son. Is he's pukey. He was days old when he started vomiting. And it took him till he was 11 to get diagnosed. So that was, well, things got bad at 11. He wasn't diagnosed till 13, but it's hard. So average time to a diagnosis is, I think, between 2 and 5 years, if I'm remembering
Yeah.
correctly.
Yes.
Um,
I came across 5 years. Yeah.
yeah, and
It's
we
a
see
long
a
time.
very wide range. I talked to a lady the other day that it was 35 years before she got a
Oh,
diagnosis.
gosh. Wow.
So Jason's took over too.
Mhm.
Um, why do you think it takes so long? Is that because it's not being recognized or there's not enough information about it? It really shouldn't be the testing, but there is a process for the testing. So why do you think it takes so long?
Yeah, I think some of the factors that we mentioned, and then even just having to put a name on it, right? And you speak about somebody without, and I don't know when her symptoms started, but I wonder if during that time when she was suffering, unfortunately, whether someone had even coined the term cyclic
Yeah.
vomiting syndrome. And without even having a name for something, then it's obviously then that much harder to even do a diagnosis, A, and then B,
Hmm.
treatments for it. So I feel bad for her. That sounds terrible. But I think for the other factors that we talked about, that may be playing a role in terms of that delay, the knowledge, the presentation, that maybe the how episodic something is. I mean, your son sounded like it was very, very close together, but for some others, it can be separated by months and months and months. Factors like that probably play a role.
I'm sure. Yeah, I agree with that because I do. It's when I finally met somebody else that even knew about CVS and, their vomiting lasted for like 3 hours. I was like, oh, I would
That would
love
be
that,
good for
right?
you
I was like, I
guys,
would love that.
right?
That would be fine.
Right.
I can take 3 hours of vomiting.
That sounds horrible.
But
That just
uh,
sounds
uh,
horrific.
yeah, but that's unfortunately the spectrum that we're looking at with CVS, right? Everybody's
Hmm.
frequency and severity is different. Um,
Exactly.
is there something you want people to know about CVS? Like I said, very
I think,
broad.
yeah, it's very broad. I perhaps maybe circling back to a point that I think we chatted about earlier. This is not all in your head. There are so many factors that play a role here. Yes, your brain is involved, but this is not just a psychological problem. This is a multifaceted, complex problem, but has physiology behind it and pathophysiology. I mean, there's things that are wrong behind it. And so let's keep partnering together so we can get the word out and hopefully identify the reasons why behind this is occurring better and find better treatments for this. So I think that's probably, I guess I want to provide a hopeful message out there if we can.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. Thank you so much for that. And lastly, as part of a campaign that CVSA has done in the past, if you could describe CVS in one word, what would it be?
A neurogastrointestinal disorder. That's two words.
I'll let it pass. We
Okay.
hyphenated ours. We hyphenated ours. So
And
why
and
and
by the
why?
way, I feel bad, but every time I go by a CVS, I always think about this CVS, not the pharmacy CVS. But my hope is that one day that we'll be thinking about this CVS as frequently as the other CVS that we see out there in the pharmacy world, because we just that's the type of awareness we need.
I agree. So you mentioned conferences, and we were actually just at AAP,
Oh, okay, yeah,
American
great.
Academy of Pediatrics. Boy, that conference was way bigger than I thought it was going to be.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, it was crazy. And we specifically targeted that one because it's pediatricians, right? Pediatrics.
Hmm. Yes,
So
across the country. Yeah.
yeah, getting the treatment guidelines into the hands of the people that may see it first um,
Hmm.
was really pretty um, geared toward what we were, hoping to do this year. So um, yeah,
That's
we'll
awesome.
need
Hopefully you
we
had some
need to
good
see it more.
uptake. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
a fabulous conference and it is huge.
it is huge.
And it brings in not just pediatricians, interestingly enough, it brings in pediatric surgeons and pediatric otolaryngologists and
Hmm.
others, subspecialties that work with children. So it's hopefully you got a lot of interest.
Yeah, we did. There were some peds GIs there as well. So
Oh,
yeah,
neat. Right.
it definitely got a lot. So okay, and did I ask you why you would say neurogastrointestinal disorder?
You didn't, but
I
it's
think
getting
you
to
kind of
that brain gut connection.
okay,
It's that's to our understanding in 2025, that's the pathophysiology behind this.
perfect. Okay, we'd like to remind everyone listening that the resources, like the treatment guidelines that we mentioned here, and information for patients and providers alike, are available on the Cyclic Vomiting Syndrome Association's website, cvsaonline.org. Thank you for listening to episodes podcast by the Cyclic Vomiting Syndrome Association, and thank you, Dr. Bruno Chumpitazi, for joining us today.
Thank you, Belinda, for having me. It was a super pleasure to be here, and I wish CVSA all the best.
Thank you so much.
We're here to amplify CVS perspectives, spark meaningful conversations, and help change the way cyclic vomiting syndrome is seen and understood. Don't forget to like, follow, share, check out resources on the CVSA website, and keep conversations about CVS going.